Okay, so after using the Fujifilm X-Pro 3 every day for the last 3.5 years now, I thought I'd give you my thoughts on what it's like to use this camera long term. The X-Pro 3 is one of the few cameras on the market that still sport a retro rangefinder aesthetic. And it's not all about beauty either. This camera's top and bottom plate are made out of titanium, which means that the camera stays quite light and it stays compact, and at the same time makes you feel like this thing can take a beating, and it can. After 3.5 years of using this camera, I have only a tiny scratch on the bottom. So that DURATEC coating that comes with the body that I bought says a lot to be able to keep this camera in good condition. And what that means is if you intend to resell this camera, you'll be able to do that with no problem, because the person who's buying it is going to look at it and think, wow, this camera is in basically mint condition. One of the more unique features about the X-Pro 3 is its viewfinder system, because it's a hybrid system. It has both an optical viewfinder and an electronic viewfinder built in. So what this means is if you want that classic film-like shooting experience, you can opt for the optical viewfinder and see the world as it is, with little frame lines inside. But if you want a more modern experience, you can use the electronic viewfinder to see the image as it's going to be before you even press the shutter button. I prefer this method, so the optical viewfinder is kind of a novelty for me. It's kind of cool to show off to friends, but it's not something I use very often. One of the things you have to be aware of though, is when you're using the optical viewfinder, any lens wider than 24mm on the Fujifilm system can be quite hard to see, because the frame lines don't compensate for something that wide. And the longer you go, let's say 75 or 90mm or even further, the frame line in the center actually just continues to shrink down. So it can be quite difficult to see what your image is going to look like before you press the shutter. Now, this isn't a huge problem if you don't mind switching over to the EVF, or if you're sticking with the typical focal length of, let's say, a 35mm equivalent, which is a 24mm in Fujifilm terms, then you're not going to have much of a problem, but it is something that you should be aware of. One of the more controversial features, though, is going to be that rear screen on the back. So there are actually two screens on the back of the X-Pro 3, an e-ink screen that you'll find on something like a Kindle, and the actual LCD that you're going to see when you flip the screen down. So the e-ink screen doesn't really do much. It can show you your film simulation, or what I use it for, which is my settings, and that's about it. It's more for show and nothing else. The purpose of keeping the screen this way, though, is because it helps keep you present and in the moment. And I understand it sounds like a little bit of a gimmick, but realistically speaking, after about 2 weeks, I was totally used to this system, and I didn't even bother checking my images right after I took them. Now, I don't know if this is because I was too annoyed with having to flip the screen down every time, or I was kind of sucked into that aesthetic of the X-Pro 3, but either way, that's something you should be aware of. But the LCD, though, is quite nice, and honestly, it's great for shooting in low angles. So for example, if you're squatting down to get something on the ground, you can use that LCD quite easily. It's not going to hinder your shooting experience in any way, but like I said, by keeping the door closed on the back of the camera, you're going to end up staying more in the moment, I think, when you're using this camera. The sensor performance on this camera is actually pretty awesome as well. Now, I know that in 2023, 26 megapixels is nothing to write home about, but realistically, most of us are really just using our cameras for Instagram or posting them on our website anyway. And I don't think that you're going to have a huge problem printing images as big as you want. When it comes to low light performance, this camera I'm comfortable shooting at up to 6400 ISO. I wouldn't go any higher than that, but even if there is a little bit of extra noise than you'd like in your images, you can always use a program like Topaz's Photo AI, or even Lightroom's own denoise AI built in to remove pretty much all of the noise from your images. So what's cool about this technology now is I can go out and shoot at ISO 6400 all I want, and I don't have to worry about getting noise in my images at all. I should also point out that this is the same sensor that's inside of the XE4, the XT4, and the X100V. The X100V, as of me making this video right now, is sold out everywhere. And I guess the reason why is because people love the image quality that comes out of these cameras. The ability to modify the settings on your camera to get your images to look like some sort of classic film stock is one of the standout features of Fujifilm cameras. Personally, I shoot RAW, but I can understand why a lot of people would love to get their JPEGs to look like a classic film photo and just be ready to send off to their friends right away straight from the camera. The autofocus on this camera is actually pretty good as well. I've never had a problem with it in low light situations, and even though it doesn't have a lot of the modern features like being able to track insects or birds, Realistically, when you buy a camera like this, that's not what you're tracking. You're tracking people, you're shooting out on the street, you're shooting travel photos and photos of your family. And for those kinds of situations, this camera is more than capable. All right, when it comes to video, let's be honest. You don't buy this camera for video, and because it doesn't have in-body image stabilization, it's not going to be your go-to video camera, so don't really consider it for that. Now, you can use it for like a webcam style situation or static shots here or there in a pinch, but I wouldn't focus on video features if you're buying this kind of a camera. So when it comes to ergonomics, this camera leaves a little bit to be desired, but to be fair, you are buying a rangefinder camera, so you know what you're getting into when you look at it right away. This isn't going to have a big, comfortable grip like you'd find on an A7R or anything like that, but if you did want a better grip, you could always buy an extension plate that you screw into the bottom of the camera and it'll give you a much better grip for your camera. So if that's your thing, go for it. Otherwise, just bear in mind that when you're out on the streets, this thing isn't going to be something you feel like you want to hold on to all day. So the standout feature of this camera is that little screen on the back. And the one thing that you should know is that that flip down screen can sometimes break over time. And the reason why is because the little ribbon that connects the screen to the camera can tear as you continue to use it over the next couple years. Now, I should point this out to you because it may be the case that you have to get this camera repaired at some point. And if you browse any Fujifilm forum on Facebook or Reddit, you're going to see a lot of people complaining about that. I had to get my camera repaired and it took me a few weeks, but now it's back in working condition and it's better than brand new. So I can't complain. So at the end of the day, do I think this camera is worth it? And personally, I do. Even though the camera is $1,800 and will run you an additional $200, for that special DURATEC coating, I think that the camera is worth it. And the reason why is because there aren't many cameras, if any, on the market that allow you to have an electronic and optical viewfinder system built into the camera, or ones that hide that LCD to prevent you from constantly looking at your images after you make them. Yes, the camera doesn't have a lot of the modern features that you'll find in cameras like in-body image stabilization, which I think is awesome to have. But what it does make up for is in the looks department. People are going to stop you and ask you questions about your camera. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit of a conversation starter, something that's quite unique in the camera world, this is definitely that. If you're looking for something that is the best bang for your buck, where you're getting a ton of features and all kinds of capabilities, this may not be the camera for you. Fujifilm has other cameras out there that will do that job for you quite well. In fact, I'm actually recording on one of those right now, which is the X-T5. So that's been it for me. If you have any other questions, just ask them in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as fast as possible. And keep shooting.